Hi, and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Mueller. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, we're going to get John involved with a star out of the United States who's, well, been in the movie industry, and the star that she is left her with a lot of concerns about not only the entertainment industry, but about herself as well. We're going to bring in Katelyn Pierce. She was the sex demon from the movie Porno, and we're going to get to that right after these.
Do you notice a change in your child? Do you wonder what's going on with my child? Do you finally see something others have been seeing for some time now? Do you see the ideology and indoctrination after your child returns home from school every day? Do you see? Yes, you do see the harm and the confusion they are causing. Do you see the role they are playing on your child's life and development? Do you see? Yes, you see now. And now you have questions. At Unmasking the Trans Movement, we're here to help answer those tough questions you can't ask anyone else, or answers that are hard to find. We discuss the many topics of this evil agenda indoctrinating our children into a world of self-destructive deviance, constant medical care, and human degradation. Our webinars provide access to supporting groups discussing the tough issues you want to talk about with real parents and experts alike. Sign up and become a member now and you'll save 30% off your first-time membership starting at just $7. Select from our bronze, silver, and gold packages, all with different options depending on your needs. Our mission is clear: to unmask the deception and protect the most vulnerable among us, women and children. For webinar dates, times, and pricing, please visit our website at unmaskingthetransmovement.com/webinars.
Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Mueller. I'm Brad Wilder. Today on the show, Katelyn Pierce is here. She was in the movie Porno. She was the sex demon in the movie, and we're going to get to her story, a little bit about finding herself from being in the movie and taking a deep look inside herself to see where she was headed and what she wanted out of her life. Let's bring in John Mueller right now. John, great to have you on the show. I know that Katelyn has a compelling story as well today. Tell me more.
Brad, Katelyn's story represents, in my estimation, a very classic example of who is being targeted in the trans movement as far as young people. The trans movement is comprised of dark special interests that are targeting these kids, very vulnerable young people, from a number of different angles. The majority of these kids have either been sexually abused, have had sexual boundaries crossed, have been groomed by the SOGI sex ed, sexual deviant material that's coming in to schools, or social contagion, social pressure. So these kids are primed, as it were, to head in one of two directions, either into a very sexualized lifestyle or getting involved in activities, or they're trying to seek safety, and oftentimes they're going to go into what they think is a very safe environment. But little do these young people know that waiting in the wings of either of those two continuums are people that are going to use them and abuse them. And Katelyn's story is very compelling because it comprises much of that dynamic. Katelyn, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. And Katelyn, you and I met, as it were, online in this sense that on social media, we'll qualify that. I do what I do as far as here on Unmasking the Trans Movement, and then deal with a number of issues in both counseling, but then and social media advocacy, really. And then I started to notice someone that was posting very effectively as far as trying to raise awareness to regarding a number of the facets of the trans movement. And eventually, I believe I reached out and you and I connected, and I thought, I need to have Katelyn on the program, because not only does she have her own program, and we're going to have you discuss that, in a bit, but there's usually a story behind someone who has waded into these waters. And I know for me, what compels me is my background as a therapist and having worked with sexual predators. Unless somebody has that kind of background, there's probably a reason why that hits a little closer to home. Your story is very compelling. Katelyn, you're going to be talking to young people that were or are where you were, and you're going to be talking to parents. So help us understand, especially given the title, you ended up going into film. And before you knew it, you found out kind of the hard way what so many young people find out. They go to Hollywood or West Hollywood. In my estimation, it's not by happenstance that the Trevor Project, that focuses on supposedly specializing for those young people that are suicidal, that are gender confused, but where are they located? And Sam Britton, the stealer of women's underwear and luggage, they are located in West Hollywood. So in my estimation, they are targeting a very vulnerable population, and Sam Britton came to the defense of Rent Boy magazine and website. That is a term used for young males that are being prostituted, brought over from England over to Amsterdam. So this has a lot of tentacles, the way kids are being used. And so your story is very powerful. Talk to us about how you got into film and then what awakened you and your own also spiritual awakening.
Well, I had done theater since I was a kid and I loved it. I think in a lot of ways the theater and saved my life. My grandfather got me into doing that, and I do love the art of theater, and I think it in a way kept me able to be in touch with my emotional self that had been shut down in a way, and kind of kept me on a driving force of like figuring out what was wrong and who I was. But as you learn, as many of us learn who loved theater and loved that aspect of it, the industry of film is a much different thing. And really the industry in theater too, when you get to that professional level of like in New York or LA, it's a very, I mean, really there's no other way to describe it. It can become very demonic. And I think one of the big elements of that is liberal feminism, and how we are manipulating girls and women, that sex and sex work and exploiting yourself and exploiting your own sexuality is somehow empowering, when it's just the opposite. And I was going to go into law school, and then I moved to Chicago. I was in college there. I went to DePaul, and I was double majoring in poli-sci and English, and I decided to do some more acting stuff. I went to Chicago Shakespeare Theater. I did some folio technique. I did theater there, and I wanted to audition for a theater program. So I did that. I got into a program in New York, a conservatory, and I moved to New York. I graduated eventually. I pursued acting, and eventually I booked a film that was untitled, where I would play a sex demon in a horror film. It's a horror comedy. I liked the script. There's a lot of nudity, but I was still also in that frame of mind that sex and exploiting yourself was empowering. And I did have a partner at the time that would kind of convince me, basically he would say, like, you have the tits, show them off to get where you want to go, essentially. And that was the frame of mind I was in at the time when I agreed to do the project. Now, I will say that character, I do think that there's an argument that there is a feminist aspect to her. That said, the shooting process was fine, and I do like the director. I think he's a good person. The producer, however, and the post-production process was extremely traumatizing. It started when I showed up in audition for the same casting director who cast me in that role. I showed up and she was horrified because they had titled the film Porno without telling anybody. And so that was the start of it. I was horrified myself, because it's one thing to be naked in a film. It's an entirely different thing to be naked in a film called Porno. I was mortified. And then it would get worse. So my contract clause said, one of the contract clauses I said when I signed on to do the film was that not only would I have the right of first refusal, which was essentially to see the promotional materials before, but that no nude stills would be used to promote the film of me. And then at 7 a.m., the film had its feature film premiere at South by Southwest in 2019. And I arrived at the airport to find out that not only had they violated that clause, but they did it in such a horrifying way that they put me naked on the poster of the film. And on what was supposed to be the best day of my career, I was sobbing at the airport by 7 a.m. And we agreed to all have a sit-down meeting. They did change the poster, but it was so funny. I arrived to check in, and Spirit, God, had sent me a lawyer. Like literally when I was checking in, I ran into one of my friends who's an entertainment lawyer. And I told him what was going on. And their argument was that they had slightly animated over my body, and so it was no longer me, and so that wasn't a violation of my contract clause, but it was very clearly me. You know how there's a film called Scanner Darkly that does this, where they do a slight animation over the real person, and so that was the way they tried to get around it. But like, it was so obviously me that before I'd even, by the time I had already found out before I went on my social media, but I had friends sending me the poster being like, oh my God, look at you, on my Instagram and stuff like that. So it was very clearly me, and it was very manipulative. But I decided, based off of my manager, her recommendation, she said, if you sue them, then they're going to kick you out of the press junket. You're not going to be able to use this as you should to forward your career. And so I didn't sue. They changed the poster, and that was the end of it. And I could just, looking back, I started making terrible decisions after that moment, like terrible. And I realized when I finally reached my full spiritual sort of, that like, that was really the moment that my inner child just was like, oh, no one's ever going to fight for me. No one's ever going to stand up for me. And I
almost like you were betrayed, and therefore you felt like you betrayed yourself, because as you had mentioned off camera, that the character you played was very much anti-porn. Your character was going after those that were harming people through porn. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So to find yourself suddenly almost that sex object was shocking.
Yes. And the way that just, I'd already done so much for the project, like then to turn around and do repeatedly, exploit me. It ended up, I didn't quit right away. But then it was supposed to get a theatrical release at IFC in April 2020. Fangoria and Shudder purchased the film. COVID canceled that. So it ended up partnering with a digital theatrical release with Alamo Drafthouse and some other indie sort of theaters. And then I ended up getting sick. It wasn't COVID. I developed an autoimmune condition that started shutting down my peripheral nervous system. It's a very, very rare condition called Parsonage-Turner syndrome or brachial plexitis. It impacts like less than 1 out of 100,000 people. And so they didn't know what was wrong with me. And it got so bad that I could no longer move my left arm at all. Like I couldn't even wiggle my fingers. And then I was, ended up at the best neurology hospital in New York City. And they figured out that they were testing me for horrible things like ALS and MS. And so it ended up being the best it could be. And I learned how to move my arms again. And I realized through the healing process and stuff that it was very much rooted in the abuse I experienced as a child. And then through all this process of healing, I also learned more of the truth of gender ideology. So when it came time for me to do auditions and all that stuff again, at first I just said, I'm taking a break and I'm not going to audition. And then I ended up leaving because I had to speak out. And I knew that if I did speak out, I would get dropped. But I was raised, we spoke about that. I was raised by working class Democrats, civil rights activists, grandparents for the most part. My mother is a wonderful woman too, but she had her problems. And thank God we had my grandparents because they saved us. And they taught me that you stand up when something's wrong. It doesn't matter the cost because you don't matter as much as the collective whole. And so I couldn't live with myself anymore and I had to speak out.
You are talking to parents, but you're also talking to young people right now that have seen and really been sold a bill of goods that this is the way to advance yourself. I'm thinking of OnlyFans. There's a lot of different facets, a lot of different avenues that young kids, and again, you have the convergence of all these different dark special interests. And the irony is, as far as the trans movement, that you have, it seems like, and this is where unmasking the trans movement, we want to help people connect dots, that what seems like polar opposites. On one hand, you have quote unquote gender non-conforming kids. So girls that used to be called tomboys, or because of abuse, they don't want to embrace anything to do with their own sexuality. So they are trying to cover that as much as distance themselves or cut themselves off, literally, and then look what happens. Or you have the hypersexualization. Either way, it makes them and leaves them easy prey for those that would exploit them. So your story is very compelling because you were, as it were, lured into by a number of different, for a number of different reasons, and by a number of different, as it were, special interests, into the sexualization part, but you were playing a role. Describe for the audience the role that you were playing, because it's not then what it sounds like. You were actually the antagonist that was dishing out justice toward those that we're going to talk about, predators.
Yes. You know, what's so interesting is it really, I don't think they wrote this intentionally to be anti-porn, but it really, as I've learned more about, and I do think it's demonic forces. So Lilith, the character I played, was a 1970s porn star that these kids worked at this this old cinema, and they found this old area that had all these old porns, but the one they decided to play, what was actually happening in the porno was that they were doing a ritual then to create, to basically make a demon out of this woman. And then they trapped her in it, and then playing it released her. And so she has a vendetta, and she wants to basically, she's haunting anyone because of their deviancy. And she ends up, the only character, it is a horror comedy the way it's played, but the only character she ends up killing is a predator who they find out the person that runs the theater was spying and creating videotapes of people in the restrooms, and that's who she ends up murdering. And everyone else, she ends up sort of waking up. They could have done a lot more in terms of, you know, expounding on the themes of the film, but it is interesting. And in some ways I look back at it and I wonder if like that work in the film sort of started waking myself up to ending this in a way that was subconscious.
You know, my work with sex offenders and those that have done significant harm. Many men that are in for life that have done the heinous things that we read about, that we see. My work on psych staff and then doing sex offender treatment. The one thing they said really corroborated what Ted Bundy said, as far as what got him, what took him in the direction. He accepted responsibility hours before he was to be executed. Ted Bundy did, during that interview with James Dobson. He tried to send the message, because he could have given multiple interviews. A lot of news outlets were very interested in having an interview with Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy only gave one interview. Ted Bundy, through his attorney, initiated communication with Dr. James Dobson, who served on the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, to talk about the dangers of and the addictive nature of pornography. Ted Bundy was not going to get out of going to the electric chair. A psychopath only does what is in his own best interest, so he didn't have to give up additional names. Ted Bundy was trying to send a message, and as you listen to that clip, it's online, you will hear him say, I'm not blaming but I want to, I take full responsibility, but I want people to understand there's other Ted Bundys out there. And it started by finding a magazine back in the 70s. That's the power, the addictive nature of it. And so what you're doing, Katelyn, is you're helping us begin to understand the power of porn to begin to take people dark. And the men that I've worked with behind bars, each in their own respective way, away from one another in solitary confinement, after me spending hours and hours and days and weeks and months with them, would finally describe, independent of one another, that something would come over them prior to committing their offense, and then something would leave them, though they still accepted responsibility. And that's why on survivorsupport.net, I have a couple of tabs called Porn and Dark Deviance. People need to understand that they can open up a doorway into very dark things and invite more than they are anticipating. And think of the film you did and how compelling. And as you say, you experienced your own abuse. So maybe a part of you was, in fact, working out some of that trauma.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of what I think, honestly, I think my entire life since then has somehow subconsciously been trying to wake me up in all my choices, even my bad choices. And it's very interesting to look back on. I do a lot of journaling now. And even, yeah, I think that I was trying to wake myself up. And I think, but the porn, what you said, I have never watched a porn in my life, which shocks people. I never even stepped foot in a strip club. Another project I did, deeply regret doing. I didn't know that essentially what I thought was I didn't know men even were aroused by rape. I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I've always only had monogamous, serious relationships. And there's something about porn that always made me feel sick. Like even if I was stealing or downloading a movie illegally when I was younger and didn't have money, whatever, like when they would pop up, I would have to close it away. There's something about porn that just made me feel so deeply uncomfortable. I couldn't even look at it. And I do think, I know it's going to sound crazy to some people, but I think it's spiritual warfare. I think that there's something very demonic at play. And I think that I think that children are connected to God in a lot deeper way than adults can keep that. Not all adults can keep that because the world kind of rips you apart spiritually, and sometimes it breaks apart your spirit and your body in such a way that you lose that connection. But as I've reconnected with her, like it so much of it makes so much more sense. And I'm rambling now, but yeah, I didn't know that about Ted Bundy.
And again, you're not rambling.
Okay.
What's so powerful unfolding right now is not only your own journey and your own healing, but Katelyn, you, in my estimation, represent the classic young person who comes out of woundedness, is trying to keep it moving, trying to find their purpose in a world that is going to lure them in all sorts of directions where they don't realize that they are easy prey to being manipulated. There's, the entertainment industry, as Brad talked about, so many different things will lure them, offer a quick fix, quick healing, offer quick money, quick fame. Yet little do they know that waiting in the wings for them are people that will use and abuse them in all sorts of different ways and then spit them out. And the trans movement then is the greatest collection of those special interests just waiting. And that's why we do what we do on Unmasking the Trans Movement, to help people understand that the porn industry is right in there with those that are ready to medicalize kids and sterilize kids, because the way you get a young person to that point is you impact them one way or another with porn. Now they are ripe they're being groomed and they're ripe for the picking. They're easy targets. And so as you started online, meaning on social media, speaking out, I knew there was a story, because you have found that people are using kids as a means to an end. And so you felt compelled to speak out. You also mentioned that you lost your brother. So there's loss upon loss, trauma upon trauma. Speak to that, because you're going to be talking to, again, young people and parents that need to know that trauma plays a lot into setting kids up to be manipulated.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to go a little bit further back with him. So my brother was my best friend. He was what I call my favorite birthday present. I was 2 when he was born, but I was born May 16th. He was born May 17th. So, and we grew up broke. So, we always had a joint birthday. It never bothered me. He was just my best friend. And I think both my parents, they met in AA, which is, but my mother is a recovering alcoholic. She's had her demons, but she works really hard, and she has always, she is that mother that would throw herself in front of a bus for her children, no questions asked. But addiction history. And my dad. So my dad was a heroin addict, very, very traumatic childhood, and he succumbed to his demons. But that type of child with that level of history should never be prescribed amphetamines. And he was put on Ritalin when he was in 2nd grade. And that, in my opinion, has set him up to be an addict. And then when he was 16, he had gotten a dirt biking accident that manifested into a staph infection that then wrapped around his lower lumbar spine and caused paralysis. So one day he woke up, he couldn't move his legs. Rushed to the hospital. The way they had to do the surgery damaged his spine in such a way that, at one point they didn't think he'd ever walk again. He was slowly able to walk, but was just pumped full of first morphine, then opioids at age 16, having already been set up from family history and then putting on amphetamines to be an addict. So I don't think he had a shot in hell not to become addicted to these. And then it was at the time, at one point my grandpa, because he OD'd twice before he died, and my grandpa begged his doctors. They were like, these were all legal prescriptions, so many prescriptions that my sister developed an addiction off of his supply. And he begged his doctors to stop prescribing, and he died at age 20. A few months, my dad died on his birthday, which was seemed to be just the final nail in the coffin for Zach. But and then he died in December that same year in 2009. And
I believe part of why you're doing this is not just for you and that little part in you, but also for your brother.
Yeah, I feel Zach with me in this fight every moment, and I know he wants me to fight, and I know he's fighting with me and helping me stay strong. And I think in a lot of ways, he and my grandparents, because they're both passed, have been, every time I almost reach the bottom, they're like, no, you got to keep going. You got to figure this out. Wake up, wake up, wake up.
And part of your
hearing your story is exactly what's going to happen to others who are going to watch this episode today. And I want you to know that you're not just fixing yourself and healing yourself, but you're also healing our viewers. And they, I'm sure if they could reach out, they would thank you and appreciate every second of today's episode so far.
Well, since you said that, I actually make an effort to communicate with anyone who needs to talk. So if you go to my YouTube channel, we did combine it. So now it's called Radical Roots Collective, and Red Moon Radio is one of the shows on that, because we're creating a channel of all sorts of the goal is to have multiple shows on the same channel that are all empowering to women and girls, and have women hosts, and it doesn't have to be any political affiliation as long as they're empowering women. But within that, my website, KatelynPierce.com, there's a connection link that you can email me. So if anyone does end up wanting to reach out for any reason, I might not respond right away, but I will respond. Because it's very important to me that people have someone to talk to.
Katelyn, would you be willing to stay with us for a second part? Because we're going to talk about your advocacy now. You have given people good context to know why you do what you do. So stay right there. I'm going to turn it back over to Brad. Brad, this has been a compelling story. We've had compelling stories in the past, but Katelyn's story, it's overwhelming.
Katelyn has lived a lifetime worth of experiences already, and you know, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And I got to be honest with you, this could be one of those moments where what you've experienced so far provides you with a much, much prosperous and more healthy and more confident lifestyle going forward. We always wonder about the things that we do in our life journey, and we regret some of the things that we've done along the way. Typically, they're when we're younger, and that's why unmasking the trans movement is such a powerful tool for parents and grandparents to get involved with, where the mistakes that you've made and I've made and maybe even John has made throughout the course of our lives when we were younger, there's things that we regret. We're always going to regret those moments, but the reality is we've had to stand strong. We've had to overcome, endure, and really just bounce back from being that person to somebody that we really want to be in the future and today. I'm glad you continue to work on yourself that way, and I think it's very powerful that people get to see somebody who has gone the path that you've gone already, that you can get out too. There's hope for those individuals who are possibly being trapped into the world of porno, possibly trapped into the world of Hollywood or the music industry. They all have their bit of corruption, and they've all got a deviance to them. And it doesn't belong in any of those, but here we are today, and it's something that, people like you fighting like this and having these discussions is going to open their eyes and let people know that, what you see on the internet is sometimes actually true, right? Because they keep saying that, this could never happen. These are stories about Hollywood, Tom Cruise, Tom Hanks, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that it's actually happening. And here's somebody that's been through that Hollywood climbing of trying to get better and get more popular and, gain the fans and the momentum and, make the big check at the end of the day. But the harm that you do to yourself is never justification for that paycheck at the end of the day. So thank you again. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement. There is more to come in part 2. Katelyn will be right back along with John Euler. They're going to dive deep into a second session here, and you're going to learn a lot, so stay right there. I'm Brad Wilder on behalf of John Euler and Katelyn Pierce. Thank you very much for being here today, everyone. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Please check out our BitChute channel. You can like, share, subscribe, and donate. As well, you can also find us online at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. We'll see you next time.